Welcome to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Thanks for joining us today on SaaS Backwards. It's a podcast that helps CEOs and CMOs at SaaS firms to improve the profitability and growth rate of their companies. And today we have a great guest for our listeners. It's Terry Sydoryk. He's CEO of Chaordix. It's a company that helps firms build their own communities to drive business results. Hey, Terry, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company?
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. I've been involved in the tech marketplace for a while now. I've had various roles within early stage companies and joined Chaordix almost 8 years ago now as the COO. And that came as a result of a relationship I had with a number of the folks in the company, as well as with the VC firm that stepped in at that point in time. Saw an opportunity to take the experiences that I've had previously and contribute those to the organization as it embarked on kind of its next phase of growth. And basically the last 8 years have been involved here. And I stepped into the CEO role about 5 years ago with the organization.
That's great. And can you tell us just a little bit about what Chaordix does and what kinds of clients that you serve?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a long history here, but early on, the founder saw an opportunity with respect to the general characterization of crowdsourcing. So the opportunity to bring a large group of people together to contribute and in essence, tackle a business or other problem that would be beneficial to the enterprise. And through that journey, developed various applications and worked with some great brands, everything from American Airlines to Orange to the European geography, a telecommunication company. We've worked with Procter & Gamble and currently have a very large presence with Lego. We've been working with them for 8 years now, and our platform runs the Lego Ideals community, which is 1.7 million members. And that group basically gets involved in putting together commercial ideas for products for Lego. And to date has been extremely commercially successful. And I think at the last count I've seen was around 33 products have entered the market. And right now there's at least another 6 that are about to come forward. So it's been extremely successful. And it's an example of how an organization who has been long working with their end users really just transitioned to add an online or digital presence to the ongoing physical connections that they have in the marketplace today. So we provide that platform. You know, we've evolved that. We can talk a little bit more about the specifics, but ultimately providing an online place where the enterprise or the brand can engage with their end consumers and give them an opportunity to work closely with the brand.
I think it would be good to talk just a little bit about like what some of the top use cases are for a brand to build communities. That's the heart of what you do for your clients. And perhaps not everybody has a sense of what the power of a community might be.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, we all can appreciate that community is something that as individuals we strive for. So whether it's the family community, which is a small group, whether it's your neighborhood, your sports team, or a specific brand, the opportunity to collect with a group of individuals that have a like interest is really the definition of community. We take that one step further at Chaordix and view that to get to true community, you have to get the individuals working with each other on a specific problem that exists for the business, for the hobby, for the sports team, etc. And that's really the differentiator. So our platform has 2 prongs to it. One is a very structured environment. So we've brought together various activities, everything from sort of research-based elements to challenges, to discussions, etc., that allow the membership to engage with each other in a very structured format. On the other side, we have a very unstructured format. It's kind of like that digital water cooler. And the value there is really the opportunity for community members to introduce and start conversations amongst themselves. So it's almost like a digital ethnography, if you will, to an online environment. So the brand or the community owner can watch what's going on within that informal discussion and gain tons of insights relative to what's important to the membership. What we've often seen with a lot of our customers is that they'll take that informal discussion, see what trends and interests are amongst the membership, and then bring contents of that back into the formal to flush it out further. So whether that be a service improvement, a product improvement, whatever that happens to be, it gives the brand a way to engage and interact with the membership to further enhance what they're offering to the marketplace. So it's a win-win for everybody. So it's quite interesting to watch. Historically, we used to run a number of communities which were really short in their time frame, a couple months long, a specific initiative, a specific objective. And there's value in doing that, but you really miss out the opportunity to build trust within the community and have that informal engagement and ad hoc discussion that happens around the specific challenge. So what we've seen is that as a community is invested into, as the membership grows, as the trust aspect of that community evolves, that's when you really see the magic happen in that the membership starts to work with each other in a way that you probably wouldn't have imagined prior. And so for some of our long-standing customers, that's where you see things really start to take shape. Furthermore, we often end up in discussions with new clients around, well, what will this take to manage? I'm concerned about sort of the maturing of this community. How will it affect my brand? And what we see is that as the membership evolves and matures, they have an affinity with the brand. They manage their own space. It's a great value to the owner as it takes the burden off of them to manage that environment.
So that actually brings me to the thing I really wanted to dig into, which is what is the value of building a community for a brand? What are the outcomes that they might expect? And I think in the context of what you've really described as building a long-term relationship, in our personal lives, we expect that our long-term relationships are going to become more nuanced, more important, more multifaceted. And I wonder if in this brand to community, brand to user base, brand to fan base, what are the stages of maturity here in this community model? If we can maybe professionalize it a little bit, talk about a maturity model, if you will, and what are the potentials that one might achieve?
From the experience we've had, it's really evolved, and there's a number of dynamics that are really affecting that, which we're really excited about as we look forward into the future of community for things like brand. First of all, we're probably to date, have focused really on the fact that a community is a brand initiative with their consumers. But ultimately, there's also the opportunity for that brand to initiate a community with their employees. What changes is really how you engage that community. Secondly, is that when we talk about a brand evolving and adopting a community mindset, it is really about that one-to-one relationship with their end users. I mean, if you think back to what the definition of marketing has always been, it's about moving towards establishing a one-to-one relationship with your end consumer. And what we've seen over time is we've moved from very much a broadcast environment, TV, radio, print, to then LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. Broadcast channels that have obviously proven value will continue to be part of the mix, but now you've got technology enabling an actual interaction. One of the things that we end up saying is that, give social a purpose. At the end of the day, these individuals are self-identifying as interested in what you're doing through follows, through likes, what have you. Most brands today continue to just simply treat them as a medium of which they will broadcast to. Our view is to take that next step and actually engage these folks. We're also seeing a movement within the marketplace that consumers are looking for brands that care. And so at the end of the day, what does that mean? They recognize that the reason a brand is successful, it's as a result of them, in the collective, that they are the ones buying the product and services. They are the ones that are commercially making the brand successful. And so what they want to see today is the brands that are going to recognize that and are willing to engage and work with them around what the brand may do in the long term. One of the key drivers in that whole equation is really what we've seen as far as technology advancement. I mean, we've seen the articles that are out there in terms of how technology is impacting every element of what we do on our day-to-day basis, and this is no different.
I want to make sure we go back just a few moments, because something you said that I think is really important was a notion of this is sort of a next step or an evolution of social media, and that it's almost as if The community function might be something that would reside within the social media group at a brand, B2C or B2B. And in fact, it might be something that strategists looking at social, how do I take my social to the next step? How do I actually create value and much deeper engagement? And we often talk about, well, am I following these people? Am I retweeting their stuff? Am I sharing their stuff on those social channels? Am I taking the inbound DMs and handling them appropriately? So here's a real opportunity for practitioners in the social space to say, wait, there's probably a lot more we can do with your brand if we take a look at community in a larger sense and with some strategic intent beyond this kind of pushing out our content and intercepting concerns. Maybe this is the call to social media strategists to take a look.
If you don't take charge of the conversation, if you're naive to think it's not happening, I think that's something that you're missing out on in terms of you've got to recognize that in today's world, you can either get in the mix and control that conversation or not, and then therefore it's going to take place around you. An individual by the name of David Spinks, he's one of the founders of CMX Bevy, and they have, in essence, an online platform for event-based initiatives. He just released a book called The Business of Belonging, which is centered around community. And he sets out a model that's based on spaces as sort of that overarching elements of why you would want to run a community. Spaces with the S standing for support, and we've seen a lot of early movements with respect to communities around support. It's clear ROI. People, in essence, help each other. The brand gets a huge financial benefit in both response as well as cost, and ultimately users helping other users. So it's clear. There's products for the P in spaces, which is product improvements. That's an area that we've been involved with. Acquisitions, the whole concept of advocacy. Again, today's consumers are looking for brands that care about what they have to say. And the minute you engage them and get involved with them, there's an advocacy aspect that they then echo out to their communities. And that's hugely valuable for a brand. Contribution, the C in spaces, contribution around collaboration and crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing is really where Chaordix got its start. And we see the value of bringing folks together that have that common interest and can work on opportunity as being the value that the brand gets out of a community. Engagement, clear again with respect to understanding that a brand cares about what you have to say and therefore gets you involved with them. The engagement aspect not only benefits the community as it is, but it allows it to grow because that extends further. And the last thing is on spaces being the success aspect, which means drives business growth. So the culmination of all of the above, depending on how far you go with each, ultimately creates a scenario where your business is being driven to a different level. The reality of today is that we're at different stages with different organizations. The progressive, forward-thinking companies are embracing this aspect of community as part of their go-forward marketing strategy or social strategy. To your point, we found that these can exist not only on the product side, but mostly on the marketing side, not always as seen as a strategic evolution of social, but sometimes running in parallel with social, but ultimately we see that this is naturally going to evolve over time such that it is a complementary aspect to what we have in place today. The last thing I just want to make a point of, Ken, is that we say, well, why Chaordix? What about Facebook? What about LinkedIn? Yeah, those both offer that opportunity and they have taught us about ways to start to engage with our community. The difference here, and again, evolving, is it's the ownership and control of both the data and the communication. In our world, when you communicate to the community, the individuals, everybody gets to see that. In the social world of Facebook, LinkedIn, there's algorithms that control ultimately who may or may not see it. And so again, is that important to you in terms of what you're putting out to your community? Probably. And then the last piece is data ownership. When you have and own the community, you control the content, you engage with the community, and as you gain insights, you have a control and access to all of that data, which is hugely beneficial for the brand.
There's also folks that don't want to participate on Facebook. So you have a slice of your customer base or prospect base that you might not reach, who might not want to engage with you on those platforms. And I think the ability to completely control the experience to the extent your platform allows that is really important. And we talk about things like YouTube as a channel versus a paid for video player. Simple analogy, but on YouTube, there could be ads for competitors or things that you don't want mixed up with your brand. Same on Facebook, right? You're running a group on the Facebook. There could be ads that take people away from the group or that aren't consistent with your brand. If you're doing a community for young people, do you want an ad for a local nightclub? Probably not. I think having control of that environment is highly valuable. But I love the spaces thing. And I think that maybe that's a great kind of revelation or, a piece of follow-up for people to take is that there is some modeling going on how to become more strategic about the use of community. And I think the use case you mentioned on support, like technology support, like there's support.apple.com and there's all those forums for that. That's a pretty tangible, understandable application and maybe a good way as the practitioners are trying to introduce the many values that can be created through community. Start there because everybody understands it and then say, well, here's the rest of this model. Why don't we try and apply that to our business and see where there might be value creation for us?
Absolutely. I mean, I can extend that further with some of the other use cases that we're involved with. There's probably an article weekly that comes out on the Lego Ideas community, which we've been involved with, as I mentioned, for 8 years. It's very specific, as Lego is a company specific, in that there's an opportunity to take raw product, bricks in the case of Lego, and ultimately create kits that are considered for commercial release. So in their case, they have an open forum, open innovation community where individuals are submitting ideas constantly. Those ideas go out to the community at large. The community votes. If it reaches, I think it's 10,000 votes, Lego then says this is worthy of a further assessment. They look at it to make sure it aligns with the brand, that there are no licensing or IP issues, and ultimately, they decide one way or the other. If you're successful with that product being commercialized, you share in a royalty, and I believe it's 2% of the commercial value. To date, there's been, as I mentioned, 33 products released. All of them have been hugely commercially successful, which ultimately has a bit of a kickback to the individual or the inventor, if you will. Lego has gotten way more mature in terms of how they launch products. There was a Canadian-based individual that created the Yellow Submarine. They flew him to the closest Lego store to Abbey Road, did a big PR thing. What's really interesting, as much as the royalty aspect is something that people get excited about, most of these individuals are just looking for notoriety amongst their peers. And initially, a lot of them, it was rumored, donated those proceeds to a charity of sorts. So they're not in it for the financial gain as much as just recognition from their community. So you can start to see how the dynamics of community would be hugely valuable for the brand. Now, look at another scenario with a longstanding customers of ours, Rust-Oleum, who is a paint stain company in the US. All of their products sells through a channel, whether it be Lowe's or a hardware store, etc. So they never had a direct relationship with their end users. The community now has given them that direct connection. And so when you are in the Rust-Oleum community, there are all kinds of activities going on, like kitchen makeovers, bathroom makeovers, garage makeovers, which take advantage of the Rust-Oleum product. So what does Rust-Oleum do? One, they learn as a result of watching how the individuals use the product, because all of it is documented. Secondly, the individuals get to work closer, and there's a lot of how-to videos in the community, so they gain value in terms of what to do with product. The collection of images as an individual works through a project is user-generated content that ultimately Rust-Oleum will work into their social feeds or other collateral or advertising. And again, it's got an authentic aspect to it as a result. So this is extremely valuable to the brand. So you see these two scenarios that obviously have great value to the brands themselves. And ultimately, the communities are extremely vibrant. They're active, they're long-standing, so they've reached maturity, there's trust, there's interaction, and a lot of times there's conversations and things that go on in the community outside of the direction of the brand, but hugely valuable as the brand observes and watches to see what's important to the individuals that are their end users.
I like to recapitulate for listeners because a lot of times guys like you'll just slip something in that is actually of very high value. And to you, it's of course. So the idea that a brand with distribution ultimately struggles to get a relationship with its customer, this is a CPG kind of normal everyday problem, from Nestle water to Rust-Oleum paint. They put the product in distribution and they lose control of it. And it's very difficult to get to the customer for insight and usage variations, right? Maybe it's SKU variations they're looking at, or flavor, or whatever it might be, packaging. I think that for the CPG listeners, which we probably won't have a lot, but maybe someone will sneak in, the idea that if your product of any kind is in distribution and you're looking for a way to get direct feedback, a community that you control gives you the opportunity to incentivize that kind of interaction.
It's evolved over time. So very much driven out of the marketing organization within Rust-Oleum, but brand managers now are active. And so typically where they would have previously initiated a focus group, which logistically would take weeks to coordinate, reach across the country, technology has just allowed you to do that on a global scale, and we turn stuff around in 24 to 36 hours. A brand manager comes back and says, hey, I'd love to get the community's response to this new retail initiative, packaging or a retail space within one of the stores we're going to have. And ultimately, that feedback is back to the brand manager within a couple of days. Everything from instructions to packaging to color choices, etc., is something that they do constantly in the community. So there's a huge amount of value there. So incremental innovation, if you will, around some of the products, hugely valuable, as well as ultimately, open innovation in terms of new ideas and things. So our communities have demonstrated both of those. And again, it's around a brand who understands and is progressive in terms of making use of this community to their best efforts.
One of the things we wanted to touch on, Terry, was the impact of the pandemic on communities and your business. So tell us a little bit about your experience in the pandemic, but also looking ahead, what you think that means for this space.
We, like a lot of businesses, obviously dealt with the impact of the pandemic from operating our business, but also just from a sense of what would happen in the marketplace. And we were fortunate that across our customer base, there wasn't any material impact. There was definitely a slowing with some of the new customers, but what we saw was quite interesting. And so if you think about this, acceptance of an online community is something that in maybe a traditional space wasn't sort of top of mind, wasn't on the strategy of a lot of organizations. But the pandemic, in essence, accelerated the thinking around how one would go about running their business virtually, and arguably put a lot of senior level folks in a position that they were experiencing an online event. And now it's become normal. And so what we found is that there is a higher level of acceptance for individuals considering a online community for membership or consumers. And so it's just accelerated the adoption or thinking relative to a strategy of going digital with respect to how I would engage in a larger sense with these community initiatives. It's been interesting to watch. I mean, you've seen and heard how others have felt that, there's been a 10-year acceleration in technology. It hasn't really changed. It just accelerated and forced us into situations that, because we're humans, because we're slow to adapt, would take longer, and we were just forced into it overnight. And so the result is we've seen a number of folks that have had interest in, in essence, giving social a purpose. And so let's generate a community. Let's engage with these people online. I've seen it. I've used it. It works. So let's move forward.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we've done a good job sort of setting the table as to what Chaordix does. I wanted to turn a little bit to the company history, stuff that'll be relevant to our listeners. The fact that the business was really a consultancy with a toolkit, and that had to change. And it would be great for you to sort of paint the picture about that situation and what motivated the move to become a software company versus a consultant with Kit.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about it and you marry up kind of the timelines across the various things that affected the organization, you'll see that Chaordix has been around for approximately 10 years. Early on, there was a view that this opportunity around crowdsourcing could be extremely valuable to a number of different sort of stakeholders. So they're ultimately using technology to bring folks together in an effective manner. And at the same time as that vision was seen, you see technology advance in terms of cloud-based, in terms of smartphones, in terms of access points, et cetera. One interesting data point is 65% of all members across our communities access the community platform via a smartphone or tablet versus the desktop. We see that as do our customers in terms of access. What's happened early on was there an opportunity to, in essence, do crowdsourcing, but every one of the brands or customers had sort of unique interests and requirements. The initial phases of the organization would address those, sort of a customization on top of a technology stack. And so ultimately it would take, anywhere from, I'll say 45 to 60 plus days to bring up a community, run it for a period of time, garner the value, and then take it back down. What we saw was the opportunity to obviously move more towards product. So appreciating the custom aspects that everyone was looking for, we went to a product-based solution with configuration, and we continue to invest in the configuration abilities to allow the brand to get closer and closer to their look, feel, and representation in the marketplace. And we continue to invest in that. We know brands hold highly their differentiation of how they look and feel to the consumers. And so our community has to adapt to allow that to happen. At the same time, the benefit to the customer is efficiencies across the product. And so for us to have a SaaS-based solution where all of our clients today operate their communities on the same platform engine, it's just configured such that it represents the brand in the marketplace. And that's been a huge benefit for them as well as for us in terms of addressing this aspect of scale. We've gone away from a custom development scenario into more of a product-oriented offering. But to the brand, as I mentioned, it's most important that they continue to allow their nuances being implemented into the community platform itself.
And so how did that change the financial performance of the business and the ability to grow it?
It is around scale. Back to 7-8 years ago, when the organization went the traditional route of attracting venture capital funding, anytime you bring on capitalization of that manner, their formula is pretty much understood in that they're looking for scale relative to top line growth, and therefore having the ability to do so is something that they would drive. So it was only natural that we pushed the platform to more of a product orientation. So we're cloud-based, we're on Amazon Web Services today. We have instances around the globe to service the various customers, depending primarily on their data restriction requirements as to where that instance will exist. But every one of them has memberships around the globe. And so individuals in the community access the platform regardless of where it sits as far as hosting it on the cloud.
I'd love you to talk a little bit about the opportunity and challenges of taking on that investment round, because you came in right as that had closed. For CEOs and CMOs that are looking at a liquidity event, as you lead up, what are the opportunities that are made possible? And also, what did you experience in terms of expectations that were being set and how you met them early on?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in this early stage technology marketplace for a number of years with different companies and typically come in at the same stage I did here, which is on that commercialization. So once an entrepreneur or founder has identified an opportunity and has a good product market fit and wants to take it to the next level and commercialize, build out of the organization, that's where my experience has just been valuable to different organizations. So the situation that any business owner, CEO, et cetera, has to recognize, as they do, is as you're growing your business and how you do that, whether you take on venture capital, whether you take on debt, all of these things have requirements that you have to appreciate. And that's the key thing. It's no different than as you build your organization with employees. I mean, you've got to give the employees the right culture, the environment, a career path for them to stick around. So as you invest for them to continue to contribute to the business, these are things you have to consider. Similarly, as you take on customers, what are the requirements of those customers or the segment that you're addressing? What are they going to be looking for? How will it affect your business? So if you rewind that all the way back to how you capitalize, you've got to understand that a venture capitalist is going to be looking for a return on their investment. It hasn't changed much in the last number of years, but the analogy that's often used is that as they invest in their portfolio and there's 10 companies, they expect 2 to completely fail, 6 to kind of be whatever, and then the last 2 to hit it out of the park. And that in total provides them with the return that they have for their investors and ultimately provides a return on the portfolio. As an individual or company taking on that venture capital, you have to understand, one, they're looking for that, so they're going to drive you for strong growth. And 2, there's a timeline. The fund that you're involved in typically has a timeline. Now, that'll vary, but I'll say 7 to 10 years is sort of an average kind of timeline. So depending on when you step in and attract that venture capital relative to that fund, you have to appreciate whether you have 5 years, 8 years, or 9 years when you start to look at what you're doing for your business and appreciate that it has an impact. In this case here, we've got extremely supportive VCs involved. Operators by heart, they understand what it takes. They've been supportive, and we continue to work closely with them through the maturing and growth of the organization.
That's terrific. I think we've done a really great job here digging in on the value of community. I think for software CEOs and CMOs that want to expand their reach into their user base and potential users, a really great platform to consider, as well as the CPGs that probably drive the really giant volumes. And I appreciate just sort of painting the picture for people that are looking at VC, sort of the nuance of the way you look at everything sort of being interconnected from the customer all the way back up to the source of funds. If people want to reach you or learn more about your company, how can they do that?
Yeah, we've got social presence, obviously, and our website, Chaordix.com. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and yeah, anytime anybody wants to reach out and find out more, we'd welcome the opportunity to have the discussion and share, our experiences. Our view is rising tide lifts all boats, and so we want to be supportive in that environment. So we've got a collection of materials that would help someone.
That's great. Also, could you just give us the name of the book and the author again? Because I think that's a great resource.
Yeah, David Spinks, and he just released, I think it was literally within the last couple of weeks. It's called The Business of Belonging.
That's terrific. Thanks very much. For listeners that want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Ken Lempit. My company, Austin Lawrence Group, is available on the web at Austin Lawrence with a W, austinlawrence.com, and would really welcome anybody's outreach wants to talk about building their SaaS and growing business generally. So thanks again, Terry, for a great episode.
Appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion this morning.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.